Welcome to this special episode of the Danger Close podcast. Over the next few weeks, I'll be answering listener and viewer questions about the novels in the lead up to the publication of Red Sky Mourning, available June 18th, 2024. Will there be spoilers? Absolutely. Be sure and stay tuned after the Q&A to listen to Ray Porter read the prologue. This episode of the Danger Close podcast is brought to you by Sig Sauer, makers of the pistol that was on my side for every deployment. All right, here we go. A little Q&A from In the Blood. Thank you to everyone who took the time to submit questions. Absolutely love these. And In the Blood, I like to have themes to all of my novels. And In the Blood was a sniper-centric novel of violent resolutions. So that was the guiding principle as I wrote this book. And let's dive in here. This is from Instagram at MBOA2. When you wrote about Alice, the quantum computer, did you know that she would play such a pivotal role in the series? Did you have the theme plan for Red Sky Mourning? What should we revisit before we dive into the pages of the new novel? And so let's start with this first one here. Did I know she was going to play such a pivotal role in the series? So I knew that she would have a pivotal role in this book, obviously, In the Blood. But then I wanted to be very careful that I didn't rely on her going forward. So I wanted to make sure that she was not in the next novel, in Only the Dead. So, or at least talked about or referenced, but she didn't play a major role in that because I didn't want to come to rely on her like Michael Knight with Kit back in the 80s and talking into his watch and all of a sudden Kit Carr comes in or something like that. I just didn't want to have an easy button to push. I wanted to remove her from it for Only the Dead. So for this one, I wanted to show what her capabilities are. And I didn't know anything about quantum computing before I dove into this. Artificial intelligence, everything that I had knew about those sorts of things just came from passing glances in media at the time. And this was before GPT really became a part of the lexicon, before people knew what that was. And so I dove in to research on this and started talking to people about quantum computing and artificial intelligence and passive targeting, hypersonic weapons, kind of all these things that are out there and are part of this next generation in warfare. So I cast a fairly broad net to start talking to people. And what I found was that I got pieces of the puzzle from each one. And my focus, of course, was the intelligence and the military side of these capabilities and these technologies. And I saw that people gave me a sliver, but a lot of this technology and how it's applied in the military is classified. So I had to put this kind of this mosaic together based on interviews, based on books, based on journals, on magazine articles, newspaper articles, and things were changing so fast as I was writing this book as well. Things were changing real time when it came to artificial intelligence and quantum computing, because that's kind of by definition, that's what quantum computing is doing, as in an AI is doing. It's learning. So very interesting. And that's people that I talk to that give me something, and then another person would give me something else. Oh, now I have two pieces. And then another person would give me something else. And it's three pieces. And so I started putting this together. So I would be shocked. And once again, I have no touch points with this in the military. I didn't do anything with quantum computing or AI in the military at all, or in the intelligence services. I would be shocked if what I describe in the novel, now things have moved on since I wrote this because things are happening so fast, but at the time that In the Blood came out, I would be shocked if what I describe in the novel is very different from what's actually out there in real life. And what a lot of people told me also, this was common, was that if they told me any more, it might put my book in the science fiction category. So for me, that was very telling. So did you have the theme planned for Red Sky Mourning? Back then, did I have the theme for Red Sky Mourning? I don't think I did back then, but I knew that Alice was going to have to come back because I couldn't just forget about her because she's part of the universe. But for the next book, Only the Dead, not really in there because I wanted to keep writing and not rely on her. But I knew that that going forward, I would have a book in which she was more of a central figure, and that's Red Sky Mourning. And we are on the cusp of the things that I write about in Red Sky Mourning. We are on the cusp of those exact things. And the author's note at the end of that book will describe in detail where we are and where we're going in the future. So There it is. And what should we revisit before diving into the pages of the new novel? I don't know if you need to revisit, but a lot of people actually re-listen or reread the books leading up to publication of the next one, which is very cool. I think my publisher would like me to say that you can jump in anywhere in the series and you don't need to read the others ahead of time, but it would be that's true to only a point, in that it'll be a much richer reading or listening experience if you read the others ahead of time. So, next one. This is from Deitzatron. I think I got that right, on Instagram. As a librarian, I'm always fascinated by the people who pose as characters for book covers, kind of the unsung heroes of the publishing industry. What's the story with the guy who models for Reese? That is a very good question, and I wish I knew more about him, but I think he's just a New York model. And not just a New York model. That sounds terrible to say it like that, meaning that he doesn't really know weapons and where to put his finger on the trigger, not on the trigger, where to point, those sorts of things. So luckily today you can manipulate images, and so he poses, I guess, but you can kind of move him around, I think. And for all the covers of the books, I'm very involved in all of them, but I want to make sure that how he's gripping the weapon on there is the way one would actually grab a weapon, because I see so many covers with people finger on the trigger, pointing it at their leg or at their buddy or whatever, or fingers on the trigger when it shouldn't really be. So I'm very involved in that part of it, but luckily you can manipulate weapons in and out of hands, which is typically how we do it on these covers. But it's a fascinating thing, and we don't show the face. Also, if you notice, you just show part of the face, because I wanted the reader first to just have this vision, and now that it's Chris Pratt in the series, maybe people that have watched the show will picture him like that. But at the beginning, I wanted just people to have their own vision of what James Reese looked like based on the description in the novel. So, different than the international version. So in the international versions, I'm not involved by design on those. They send me those covers and ask me if I have any input. And for the most part, I say no, because I think they're so interesting, because they're so different, and they're created by art departments for those different markets overseas. So for those, there'll be fingers on triggers. There'll be, James Reese will be in like a tank top, or he'll have tattoos maybe, or the hair is totally off, or all these things, the weapon's not right. So I let the international covers just be what they are, because I think that's kind of fun that way. And then I put my energy and effort into the hardcover editions. All right. And I should say that I don't know how it works with other books, because I've never asked, but I would think that it's kind of the same. You have a model type person that you can manipulate depending on the theme or the story of that book. All right, from X, here we go. The 17 Hitman. I am just now a third of the way into In the Blood. My question is, how do you feel about where AI is going, and is it one of the biggest threats to the American way of life? Well, that's the real question, isn't it? And I think you're going to like Red Sky Mourning, so I'll dive into that in Red Sky Mourning. So you have to finish In the Blood and then move on to Only the Dead, and then Red Sky Mourning, June 18th. But that exact question there is really the one that gets explored in Red Sky Mourning. So stand by. All right, next one from X at KevAll1385. Can you expand on Reese's forgiveness of Nazar at the end? He forgives him, but he remembers his promise to Joni and ends Nazar with violence. Is it his personal forgiveness but justice on the behalf of the Strain family? It's complex, but so are justice and vengeance. Exactly. I think the answer is in the question. And that's what I wanted. I wanted the juxtaposition of that forgiveness, of that violence, of that justice. And it might be different for James Reese than it is for the reader. So that was a really, fun might be the wrong word, but interesting part to write. And I enjoy writing every part of these stories. So, and you're right, it is complex. The BCM AT Angular Torque Optic Mount. Twice the clamping force at the rail. Unprecedented zero retention. Less points of failure. The BCM Raider modular rail for AR rifles is built using a double wall extrusion, creating one of the most rigid free-floating platforms in its weight class. BCM Raider offers Picatinny rails and features either M-LOK or KeyMod interfaces at 3, 6, and 9 o'clock for the placement of additional enabling accessories. Go to BravoCompanyUSA.com and get yours today. Thank you to Bravo Company Manufacturing for your support of military law enforcement and the Danger Close podcast. Next one, at Smith Actual 2. Is Reese really in a coma and everything since the first book is all a dream in his head? Dang it. Got me. No. Well, not yet anyway. I don't think this is going to be like Dallas. Is it Dallas? Maybe Falcon Crest, whatever that one is in the 80s when the last season turned out to be a dream. So, yeah. No, but I like the question. Backdraft Live here on X. We know your history in the SEALs as a sniper. What was the hardest part to get right with their standoff duel? Did it have another variation you considered writing? If so, what was it? And so I guess the trick, maybe that is the right word, for this was how to write a sniper-centric novel that doesn't come down to the tropes in other sniper-centric novels. How do you write a book that's sniper-centric without having that standoff at the end of two snipers looking for each other, either on opposite hillsides or buildings or something like that, scanning, patient, looking, watching for the other to make a mistake, and then shooting. And typically, in some of these movies and books, they shoot at the same time and one goes down the barrel through the scope, not to the barrel, but goes through the scope and into the other guy's eye type of a thing, like in a Carlos Hathcock type scenario. So I wanted to avoid that. So that was really the challenge for me. And the fun of it was writing a sniper-centric novel without that scene, maybe a scene that everyone expects. So maybe a series of chapters that everyone expects. So how do you do that? And so I came at it from the perspective of looking at this through James Reese's lens, but him as a student of warfare. How do you outthink a sniper? And how do you essentially maybe even outthink a readership or an audience that's expecting that and still write a book that's sniper centric? And so that's how I came up with having the decoy out there and then the way James Reese finishes it. Because I think when I frame this as a sniper-centric novel of violent resolutions, that people expect that scene. And then to not have that, but still have it sniper-centric, that was a fun part for me, and have James Reese end it the way he does with the tomahawk. So that was really fun. Did it have another variation? Only in conceptual phase, where I'm going through that outline and I'm thinking through, okay, how do I do this? Are they going to be on these hillsides? No, I've seen that before. That's in every one of these books. How do I do this a little bit differently? And then that's what I came up with, is what's in the book. And here we go. This is Matthew Jisk, also on X. Interesting choice in picking the Nagant revolver. I might have said that wrong, but when did you first learn and operate it? So I think this might have come from James Rupley, who does the Vickers Guides. You can follow him, James Rupley Photo, on Instagram. Takes amazing photos, takes all the pictures for the Vickers Guides series. They're like coffee table books. And they're absolutely amazing. I have every single one. They're my first stop when I'm doing the weapon-centric research for the novels. James Rupley, amazing guy. So I think this came from him. I think I asked him, what's something that I can use in this book? Here's the person, here's the area of the world. What's something that makes sense here, that's unique, that would be interesting to the reader, and also develop the character and everything else going on in the novel. So I'm pretty sure that's where that came from. It's been a couple moons since then, but I'm pretty sure that's where that came from. Or I might have just asked him about that specific revolver and then gotten into more detail with him about it. But I'm pretty sure that's where that came from. Just cool, interesting. And most people think that you can't put a suppressor on a revolver, but you can. Not all, but some. All right, from Facebook, Mike Watkins. Is Abelard based on a real person or persons that you know? So Abelard is a nod to David Morrell and his series of books that came out in the 80s, The Brotherhood of the Rose, The Fraternity of the Stone, and The League of Night and Fog, and the Abelard Sanction in The Brotherhood of the Rose in particular. So amazing trilogy. Highly recommend it to everyone. It was very impactful to me, cemented me, the first book, Brotherhood of the Rose, on my path into special operations, SEAL teams in particular, and into publishing. So you can talk. I did a podcast with David Morrell not too long ago for the 50th anniversary, so in 2022, of First Blood. And so we talk a little bit about the Brotherhood of the Rose and the impact that it had on me. So Abelard was chosen specifically because of the Abelard sanction in that book. And then it is actually based on somebody that I know. And I'll leave that one there. All right. This one, Facebook, Bob, Galarneau. In the paperback copy on page 189, what was your experience with the LA County Sheriff's Department Special Enforcement Bureau? I was on SWAT team from 83 to 89. Oh man, thank you. Well, thank you for your time. And so LA County Sheriff's Department, a friend of mine who is a doctor in LA flies with them. So that was, where that came from. And they did do an exchange program with, units in Israel. So that's where that one came from. Seth M. Hill, Facebook. What is your favorite long gun to shoot? What is a long gun you'd like to own in the future? Oh, favorite to shoot. That is a very good question. I don't know if I have a favorite necessarily to shoot. I like 300 Win Mag in general as a caliber because that was kind of the workhorse in special operations when I was coming up, at least before 9/11. And then after 9/11, it became very readily apparent for those of us that went downrange how advantageous it was to have an auto-loading weapon system that could perform both in a sniper type role, but then also clear streets and houses and that sort of thing. So the Mark 11 and Mark 12 really kind of rose to the forefront as far as if you're picking a sniper weapon system to go in and get the job done. But up until that point, we were really basing a lot of our tactics and training on the Vietnam model. And so, essentially a hunting rifle with a scope. And in either 308 or 300 Win Mag. And so for us, it was 300 Win Mag in the SEAL team. So I just shot it so much and got to know that round so well that I think rifles in 300 Win Mag will always probably be the ones that I gravitate towards. That being said, what is the long gun you like to shoot, own in the future? That Shytac, what is it, 408 and 375, both of those. What a cool weapon system. So I always wanted those. I worked with a unit in Iraq in 2004 that was testing one of those rifles out, and I just thought it was super cool. So I wanted one, but back then they might as well have been $10 million back then. But I think I might need to pick one up one of these days soon. So that, and maybe the Walther from the Living Daylights that has Timothy Dalton behind it. Those are very hard to come by, but maybe one of those, and then maybe like a history of sniper weapon systems. I'm the worst person to ask about anything like what one gun should I get or what one this should I get. I'm not your guy for that, but I think a history of sniper weapon systems, like all lined up, that'd be pretty cool. All right. That brings us to the end of In the Blood. Thank you guys for the questions. Sincerely appreciate it. And stay tuned for the next episode where I'm going to talk about Only the Dead. And then keep listening now for the prologue read by Ray Porter. Also go to officialjackcarr.com. Check out the new merch over there. Click on like and subscribe. And until the next time, take care out there. Stay safe. Be strong. Keep fighting.
128 people are confirmed dead in Africa's worst incident in recent memory. Early reports indicate that multiple missiles were fired from a nearby field.
In the Blood, a sniper-centric novel of violent resolutions. The fifth novel in the James Reese Terminal List series.
Prologue. Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso, Africa. She had been strikingly beautiful once. At just over 40, she still turned heads, a trait she often worked to her advantage, both personally and professionally. But even as confident and, more importantly, competent as she was, it was not lost on her that fewer heads were turning these days. She was well aware that her looks had a limited shelf life. She accepted it. She had enjoyed them in her youth, but now she had other, more valuable skills. Skills she had put into practice hours earlier. As she waited her turn in line at the check-in counter at the Air France section of Thomas Sankara International Airport, Ouagadougou in Burkina Faso, no one would have guessed that earlier she had shot a man 3 times in the head with a Makarov 9x18mm pistol. The Makarov would not have been her first choice, but on assignments like this, you used what was available. It had worked. The man was dead. The message had been sent. Alia Galin brushed her raven-black hair to the side and glanced at her smartphone, not because she wanted to know the time or scroll through a news feed or social media app, but because she did not want to stand out to local security forces as what she was, an assassin for the State of Israel. She needed to blend in with the masses, which meant suppressing her natural predatory instincts. It was time to act like a sheep, non-attentive and relatively relaxed. She needed to look normal. Had she been stopped and questioned, her backstory as a sales representative for a French financial firm would have checked out, as would her employment history, contacts, and references developed by the technical office just off the Glilot Ma'arav interchange in Tel Aviv, home to the headquarters of the Mossad, the Israeli spy agency tasked with safeguarding the Jewish state. The laptop in her carry-on contained nothing that would betray her. No secret backdoor files storing incriminating information. No internet searches for anything to do with Israel, terrorism, or her target. The computer was clean. It was getting more difficult to travel internationally with the web of interconnected facial recognition cameras that continued to proliferate around the globe. Had it not been for the Mossad's technology department, she would have been arrested many times over. The Israeli intelligence services had learned the lessons of facial recognition and passport forgery in the age of information the hard way on the international stage 12 years earlier, when 26 of their agents had been identified and implicated in the assassination of Mahmoud al-Mabou in a Dubai hotel room. Al-Mabou was the chief weapons procurement and logistics officer for the Al-Qassam Brigades, the military wing of the Hamas terrorist organization. The Mossad would not repeat the mistakes of Dubai. Her French passport identified her as Mélanie Cotillard, and if someone were to check her apartment in Batignolles-Monceau, they would find a flat commensurate with the income of a mid-level banker in the financial services industry. No disguises, weapons, or false walls would betray her true profession. The man she had come to kill was responsible for the bombing of a Jewish daycare center in Rabat, Morocco. Not all in the Arab world were supportive of Morocco recognizing Israel and establishing official diplomatic relations. If retribution was not swift, it emboldened the enemy, an enemy that wanted to see Israel wiped from the face of the earth. When Iranian-backed terrorists targeted Israeli children, justice was handled not by the courts but by Caesarea, an elite and secretive branch of the Mossad. More and more, drones were becoming a viable option for targeted assassinations. They were getting smaller and easier to conceal. But even with the options that came with the increasingly lethal UAV technology, the Mossad still preferred to keep some kills personal. Israel was a country built on the foundation of a targeted killing program, one that had continued to evolve, as did the threats to the nation. There was nothing that put as much fear in the hearts and minds of her enemies as an Israeli assassin. Though Aliyah maintained her dual U.S.-Israeli citizenship, she had not set foot in the United States in almost 15 years. Israel was now home. Her parents had been born there and had been killed there. A suicide bomber from Hamas taking them from her just as they began to enjoy their retirement years. She had been in the Israel Defense Forces then, doing her duty with no intention of devoting her life to her adopted homeland. She would be back soon. She would quietly resign from her job in Paris, which had been set up for her by a Sayan, and return to Israel. Sayanim made up a global network of non-Israeli, though usually Jewish, assets that provided material and logistical support for Mossad operations, not for financial incentives, but out of loyalty. Aliyah planned to take time off to see her children and her sister who cared for them. She also planned to talk to the head of the Special Operations Division about moving into management. She was getting tired. Perhaps this would be her final kill. The assignment had been relatively straightforward. She did, in fact, have a legitimate meeting with a bank in Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso's capital city. The instability inherent to the African continent also provided opportunity for investment. Her cover for action intact, she had 3 days to locate and case the residence of Kofi Kouyaté. They called it a close target reconnaissance when she had worked with the Americans in Iraq. She reflected on the operational pace of those intense days often, the lessons learned, the relationships fostered. Her days of seducing men in hotel bars were in the past, at least in this part of the world. Enough of them had ended up shot, stabbed, poisoned, or blown up after thinking with the small head between their legs that others became wary when a beautiful, olive-skinned angel offered to buy them a drink. The Mossad could have used a hit team of locals on this assignment, but her masters in Tel Aviv still preferred to send a message. Hurt Israeli citizens, and we will find you, no matter where you hide. Aliyah's generation of Kidon assassins had proven worthy inheritors of the legacy of Operation Wrath of God, which targeted those responsible for the 1972 massacre of Israeli athletes in Munich. She had worked this job alone, no accomplice to turn her in or identify her to the infamous Burkina Faso Internal State Security Service. If you were rolled up in this part of the world, you could look forward to an interrogation and torture worse than what you would experience in the West Bank. Out here, you would be questioned, beaten, burned, and mutilated before being gang-raped until you were dead. Though security was lax by internationally accepted standards, she still had to empty her purse and small suitcase onto a table beyond a metal detector that she had a strong suspicion was not plugged in. As the 2 security guards went through her bag, they paid a bit too much attention to her bras and underwear. Finding nothing suspicious that gave them an excuse to bring her into a back room for a secondary search, they let her proceed to her gate. Perhaps if she were younger, they would have crafted an excuse. Aging in this business did have its benefits. She was looking forward to leaving the African heat behind and settling into her business-class seat on the air-conditioned Air France flight with service to Paris. She was ready for a drink. Air France still took pride in the French part of their lineage and served tolerable white wine even this early in the morning. Waiting to board, she allowed her mind to wander to the past 6 months in France, the children she had left in the care of her younger sister in Israel, and a possible return to, no, not normalcy, as life had never been normal for Aliyah, but possibly an evolution. Yes, that was it. An evolution in her life. Maybe she would visit the United States, travel with her children, and introduce them to the country where she had lived with her parents until they returned to the Holy Land when Aliyah was 10. She smiled, imagining her son and daughter playing on the white sand beaches in the Florida sun. Normal. They were still young enough that she could be a mother to them. What would she do at headquarters? Work as an analyst in collections or as an advisor to the chief or deputy director? More appealing was a transfer out of operations and into training. Her hard-earned skills and experience would be put to good use at the Midrasha, the elite Mossad training academy. Would she be able to adjust after all these years in the field? Killing was all she knew. As she boarded the flight, distracted by thoughts of the future, she failed to notice the man watching her from across the gate. When she crossed the tarmac and disappeared into the plane, he placed a call. Nizar Katan studied the two men from neighboring Mali as they removed the Strela 2 missiles from the back of the Jeep. A Soviet-era shoulder-fired surface-to-air missile, the 9K-32 Strela 2 was almost as common in sub-Saharan Africa as RPGs and AK variants. Nizar knew the Strela had been used to successfully shoot down multiple airliners over the years. It was a reliable missile system that had proven its worth, but it was getting old. During the 2002 Mombasa attacks in Kenya that targeted an Israeli-owned hotel, the al-Qaeda-inspired terrorists had fired 2 Strelas at an Israeli-chartered Boeing 747. Both missiles had missed the target. Having worked with enough indigenous talent over the years, Nizar chalked it up to operator error. Still, he wasn't going to take chances, which is why 4 of one of the Cold War's most prolific weapons would be used on this mission. Nizar and his French accomplice had recruited the 2 patsies from the ranks of Nusrat al-Islam, or Jama'at Nasr al-Islam wal-Muslimin to the initiated. The group formed when al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, Ansar al-Din, and al-Murabitun merged in 2017, with a mandate that called for killing civilians from Western nations. They would be perfect. Still reverberating with the echoes of French colonial rule, insurgent groups in West Africa were ripe for exploitation. Financial incentives cemented the deal. In this case, Nusrat al-Islam thought they were striking a blow against their European oppressors in an operation organized by Nizar, who they believed to be an al-Qaeda facilitator. Their tasks were simple. They were to transport the 4 surface-to-air missiles from Mali into Burkina Faso, where they would link up with Nizar and the Frenchman and be given their target. Unbeknownst to them, their other task required them to die. French Special Forces soldiers had proven extremely proficient in decimating the ranks of Nusrat al-Islam in Africa. Say what you will of the French, their operators were some of the best in the world. The officials meeting weekly in the Élysée Palace turned a blind eye to French military and intelligence actions in Africa, with few war correspondents covering what was essentially a forgotten conflict. French soldiers targeted and killed with impunity. Most of the developed world cared little for what transpired on the Dark Continent. The French government was smart enough to allow their citizens the freedom to travel, train, and join terror groups abroad. What they were loath to do within their own borders, even in the wake of the attacks in Nice and Paris, they were more than happy to do in their former colonies and protectorates, perhaps as a psychological fuck you to those who had thrown them out in the wars of liberation that swept the continent in the mid to late 20th century. In Europe, France was a liberal bastion of democratic socialism. Overseas, they hunted their enemies with ruthless efficiency. Jean-Pierre Le Drian was capable and resourceful. His former teammates would have described him as merciless. A former French Foreign Legion Maréchal des Logis chef, he now found employment as a soldier of fortune, a mercenary with an axe to grind. Rather than face charges for an atrocity in Africa that was too much for even those fighting an expeditionary counterinsurgency, the former staff sergeant was on the run, and he was valuable. He knew just where to look to find black market weapons and regional guns for hire in this forgotten corner of Africa. Le Drian fancied himself a successor to the Waffen-SS commandos who escaped Nazi Germany following World War II and found refuge in the Legion, fighting in Indochina in the Devil's Brigade. Were those stories fact or fiction? It didn't matter. Le Drian was guided by the myth. He was his own Devil's Brigade of the new century. He knew that he had done what was necessary. These savages deserved no respect. What was coming next would be easy for him. Nizar could not care less about the plight of the locals. Africa was just as shitty as the places he had left behind in the Middle East. His assignments in Syria and Ukraine had not been out of allegiance to Allah, but out of a desire to leave that world behind. He had feigned support and devotion to the cause time and time again, always wondering how those around him could be so naive. Allah didn't care for Nizar. The Prophet and the cult that followed him were no different than adherents to any religion the world over. Con artists in a protection racket, just like he had witnessed in his time with the Bratva, the Russian mafia. Nizar was clear on where real power lay. In the dollar, the euro, the yuan, gold, diamonds, silver, and now Bitcoin. Enough of those, and you could be a living, breathing god in the flesh. What Nizar wanted, Allah could not deliver. Praying 5 times a day in accordance with the 5 pillars only wasted time. His skill with a rifle had been his ticket out of Syria and then to Russia and Montenegro. When his mentor had outlived his usefulness, Nizar had put him down with a shot from a suppressed Stechkin pistol, just as he'd been instructed by his then-handler, General Qasim Yadid, a Syrian general who had been found shot in the knee and then poisoned with a highly toxic substance. Nizar had put enough of the story together to conclude that the general's death was the work of James Reese, the man he currently had in his sights. Nizar had escaped to Moscow and into the waiting hands of the Russian mafia before he struck out on his own, finding a home in Montenegro, a way station of illicit trade over millennia. He enjoyed the protection he received there, but sensed it was time to move on. Trust your instincts. His next kill would allow him to relocate. Thailand, the Philippines, Argentina. He had not decided yet. This last payday, James Reese's death, would make it possible. It would also be his greatest challenge to date, as his prey might at this very moment be hunting him. Fortunately for Nizar, James Reese was a man with enemies. Enemies at senior levels of governments hostile to the United States, governments with intelligence services that had close ties to proxy terrorist groups. Nizar briefly wondered if the information that had led him to Burkina Faso had originated in Russia or Iran. No matter. It was time to move a pawn on the board. It was time to draw Reese out of the mountains of North America and onto the battlefield. Nizar closed his eyes and took in the dry morning air. He was ready. The men were dressed in the uniforms of the Burkina Faso security forces. They had parked off a red dirt road flanked by the long grasses of the savannah. Their position gave them a clear line of sight to aircraft departing Thomas Sankara International Airport. The retainer money from Eric Sawyer that had been laundered through a construction company in Montenegro was not insignificant, but it was not quite enough. The former Army Ranger and private military company's CEO had used Nizar to eliminate problems. He had died, under suspicious circumstances, on his island property in the West Indies, but not before he had set up a contract to eliminate James Reese. Was the CIA involved in Sawyer's death? Nizar could not be sure, but he had his suspicions. Had the retainer been a few more million, Nizar would have considered taking the money and not fulfilling the contract. With Sawyer dead, there would have been no repercussions. Perhaps if he were not on Reese's radar, Nizar would have walked. But he was. Nizar suspected that Reese had killed two of Nizar's past handlers. The former SEAL was a threat, one that needed to be dealt with. Putting him in the ground solved two problems. It eliminated an exceptionally competent professional targeting him, and it unlocked the other half of Sawyer's money, allowing Nizar to disappear and to not have to go for his gun every time he caught movement in the shadows. If he was going to vanish and leave this life behind, he needed to kill James Reese. The Frenchman had come to him courtesy of his new handler, the man in the wheelchair. They had met in person only once, in Dubrovnik. The coastal Croatian city was close enough to Montenegro that Nizar could make the trip with relatively few complications. His potential handler, on the other hand, had to travel by train and ferry from Turin, in northern Italy, to the Balkan state on the Adriatic. Nizar had watched him over the course of 4 days, looking for signs of surveillance. The man in the wheelchair was a veteran of the game. He knew Nizar was observing and vetting him. He was a professional, and would have expected nothing less. Nizar found himself grudgingly gaining respect for the small man who pushed himself through the streets and hauled himself in and out of taxis and into restaurants and cafes without asking for help or letting a moment's worth of self-pity cross his face. The man wore a different tailored suit every day, a bold silk ascot around his neck. Like Nizar, he stayed off cell phones and computers. He was a student of the old school. How he ended up in the wheelchair was a source of mystery and conjecture to those who lived and worked in the darker side of the clandestine economy. It was rumored he had been put there by a sniper. Having established that the man was not bait, Nizar sat down with him over coffee and they worked out their arrangement. Without Sawyer, he needed someone else who could navigate the underworld, acquire weapons, and find additional talent. Additional talent would be necessary on this job. His one and only in-person meeting with his new handler had felt like a job interview. The small man confined to the chair studying him with those hawk-like eyes, judging, assessing. Nizar needed a partner on this mission, one with language abilities and a high level of martial prowess. The man in the wheelchair had delivered. If James Reese was as good as his track record would suggest, a second set of eyes and another scoped rifle in the fight would pay dividends. Le Drian glanced at his watch and barked at the two soldiers. When operating in this part of the world, it helped to have a French citizen on your side who also spoke Arabic and Moray. That he boasted a background in the French Foreign Legion, operating almost exclusively in Africa, made him worth the investment. That he had a beef with the French government only helped solidify his allegiance. "Just a few more minutes," the Frenchman said in flawless Arabic. "Unless they are delayed," Nizar responded. "Yes. Always a probability in this part of the world. This is Africa, after all." "Are they ready?" Nizar asked. "Yes. They think they are making a statement. Killing the colonial invaders, which, as you know, appeals to me." Le Drian could never set foot in France again, banned to the outer reaches of what had once been an empire. Even the French Foreign Legion had standards. Hunting and killing were one thing, torture was another. The memory of Algeria had yet to fade. "Get ready," Nizar said. "Confirm the tail number," and the phone in the Frenchman's pocket chirped. He spoke in Moray and hit the end button. "She's on board. Plane is taxiing." "Good. It is time." Aliyah leaned back in her seat and took a sip of wine. It was just after 9:00 a.m. The plane gained speed and lifted off, clearing the buildings at the east end of the runway and making a slow turn over the capital city. The mission was never over. Not now. Not when she landed in France. Not when she returned to Israel. Not ever. This was a war, and she was a combatant. Something that was driven home in Iraq when the Mossad had detailed her to the Central Intelligence Agency. Her dual U.S.-Israeli citizenship allowed her to liaise between the Mossad and CIA on matters pertaining to the State of Israel. She missed those days. She missed that mission. It was straightforward. She missed the people she had worked with. She missed one in particular. As the aircraft banked northward and gained altitude, she looked through her window. The buildings turned to huts. The semi-paved road of the capital morphed to red dirt, and then to the grasses of the African plains. She wondered how long it would take them to find the man she had killed. Had she not been a trained intelligence officer, she might not have taken note of the green Jeep and faded purple van that stood out in contrast to the light brown grasses that surrounded them. At this low altitude, she could still discern the outline of 4 men looking up at the gigantic plane headed for Europe. Had she not been on the receiving end of RPGs and Katyusha rockets, she might have mistaken the 4 flashes for the glint off a windshield, or perhaps a deformity in the thick plastic window at her shoulder. But she was a trained intelligence officer, and she had been on the receiving end of enemy rockets and missiles. She thought of her 2 children. She thought of her husband, who had preceded her in death. She closed her eyes. "Though I walk through a valley of deepest darkness, I fear no harm, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort." For the briefest of moments, she wondered if she was the intended target. And just before the first missile impacted the fuselage, she determined that was the only logical conclusion. She was responsible for the innocent lives on the plane. Mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, children, and grandparents, who would never take another breath. She wondered who had betrayed her, and she went to her death with the weight of 128 additional souls on her already troubled conscience.
Until the next time, take care out there, stay safe, be strong, keep fighting.